This morning's scripture reading is Matthew 5, verses 13 through 16. You are the salt of the earth, but if the salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled by men. You are the light of the world. A city on a hill cannot be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on its stand, and it gives light to everyone in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before men, that they may see your good deeds and praise your Father in heaven.
Well, good morning. We're going to continue our sermon series on the healing words of Jesus. You know, there's a lot of power in some of the things that we have known for a long time that Christ has said. But a closer examination, not just the things you think you've heard, but a closer examination shows that many of his words were deeply healing, deeply healing. This is the case today. We're going to look at the salt and the light. We've looked at in the past metaphors. One metaphor was the yoke, that Christ's yoke is light and easy to wear. That's a simple metaphor. In our last sermon, we looked at the nested metaphors of living water. Not only living water that comes within us, but flows from us for the benefit of others. That's a complex metaphor. Today, we're going to see one that is a pairing metaphor, that of salt and of light. Well, what makes this so healing? So keep in mind that there is great depth to his words. When we are salt or light, we actually have purpose. We have purpose. But it is a complex type of purpose in that we not only have purpose, we have meaning to others. You know, during the period of time that Christ talked about the salt and light, salt and light were huge. They went to great caution to preserve the flame of light wherever they did. They would carefully tamp it down and put it under a bowl when they left so that it would burn lowly, so that when they returned, they could return it to light. Light was a huge thing. Without it, life basically ground to a halt. So light to the people listening to these healing words, must have been hugely meaningful, that not only they understood the value of light, but they understood that he's saying, we are the light. We are intended to be the light. Wow, that's huge, very huge. So let's look at the structure and setting. You know, we can push back, all kinds of depression, pessimism, negativity, self-criticism, as we discover our roles in furthering God's kingdom. This is one of those that's saying, hey, wake up. You're more than you think. You are like light. You are like salt. So the structure, the two metaphors occur close to the beginning of the Sermon on the Mount. Most of us are familiar with that. Jesus has gathered followers from Galilee, Decapolis, Jerusalem, Judea, and the region around the Jordan. We see that in Matthew 4:25. These crowds needed instruction. They were there for two reasons, typically. One is to see the spectacle of Jesus himself with regard to the things he was able not only to do, but the meanings that he was able to derive from even some of the most simple Old Testament scriptures. But he was bringing a whole new view to these. And so these crowds gathered, but they needed instruction on what will it mean to follow him, Christ, and be part of his kingdom. They were clueless. All they knew was the old covenant and rolling back sin. That's all they knew. And here's Jesus performing things that they had never seen before and talking to them about a new kingdom. They needed instruction. Well, what you see here is passive states of being. Three different things. Passive states of being, you're light, you're something. Active behaviors, you are light, you light up, or you are salt, you actually help in meal preparation. And passive receptors of the actions of the other two on others. This is, you have a purpose, you're delivering the purpose, and you have impact. That's a very deep metaphor. I'm sure that in many cases, the people that were hearing it were just awestruck by the complexity of what Christ was teaching them. So the two metaphors really, when you look at this together, of salt and light, seem to combine all three of those qualities. They are states of being, but when we are salt and light, we in fact, act upon the lives of others. And when we are seen and tasted by others, we are recipients of the actions of others. Isn't that amazing? Most people, when they hear salt and light, don't really understand that full context of what Christ was doing. Certainly the people of Jesus' time did understand both salt and light. Very few people had access to a private source of salt. Isn't that amazing? We just look around the table today and yeah, a little salt, yeah, always helps. None of us understood what it meant to them. First of all, the sources of salt, particularly in this area, were from the Dead Sea, and they were contaminated. This wasn't pure, sodium chloride like we have on our table. Oh, no. It was contaminated with a number of other minerals. And when it rained, the rain leached out the sodium chloride, the good stuff, and left calcium carbonate, calcium sulfonate, all kinds of stuff that's just junk. It's a contaminant. And so you were probably thinking, well, how could salt lose its saltiness? Well, it leaches out. And what's left is essentially garbage that needs to be thrown away. Wow. So a lot of times unscrupulous marketeers of the time would actually contaminate sodium chloride with gypsum, that's calcium sulfonate, and it cheated. They were cheating. They were adding the weight to the salt with an adulterant. So it's easy to see why some time was spent on salt and how the purity of it was important. The same thing with light. Oil for lamps was incredibly expensive at that time, yet necessary if you wanted to extend the day's activities beyond sunset. Very valuable, very important. Today, like I said, we take salt and probably light for granted. But if you look at salt especially, it's essential not only for food, but many of you may not know, essential in manufacturing probably 60% of the medicines that we use today. It's also incredibly important in technologies. Chip and wafer manufacturers use all kinds of different salt solutions in producing chips for your phones, for everything else, all kinds of things. We now have realized that not only does great light make things more convenient, but it's a form of energy. Ooh, yeah. These folks didn't know that at the time. They had no clue. In fact, energy was a sort of a distant concept, kind of around fuels. You'd see some energy. But in fact, light is a form of energy. We know a little bit more. And it deepens the metaphor for us as far as the healing words that Christ has uttered. So let's look at salt and light in the Bible. How did that come about? Well, there's several things, interesting allusions, if you will, to salt. First of all, Lot's wife in Genesis 19, she was turned into salt as a judgment. Sometimes conquering armies would sow salt. Anybody understand why that was? Why would a conquering army sow salt into the ground? The reason for that is they didn't intend for anything to grow in that ground. They intended the conquest to be complete, and no one would be able to ever harvest their crops for decades. That's why they did that. So they couldn't rebuild or replant. Because of its value, though, salt was an element of sacrifice. Instead of doves, or instead of a fatted calf, or a young blemishless lamb, salt often was sacrificed. It was sacrificial. That's the value that was placed on it. Here's where it gets really interesting. Salt was also valuable and significant in the New Testament. Believers are told to have salt in yourselves and be at peace with one another. That's found in Mark 9, verse 50. Again, light created at the beginning of the world. It's interesting. What day, do you recall what day the sun was created? It wasn't on the first day, and yet God said, let there be light. And there was. God himself was that light. The psalmist says that Jehovah is my light and my salvation. That's in Psalms 27. Jesus is stated as the true light, and his followers are sons of the light. And that's found in 1 Thessalonians 1 and 5. So salt and light are mentioned throughout the Bible, sometimes allegorically, sometimes as a metaphor, sometimes literal. But Christ is saying, you are the salt, you are the light. And in those three ways of the metaphor that I just discussed with you, it must have had an enduring effect on those people that heard it and helped them understand what this whole new kingdom thing was. Completely different, completely off the rails compared to the old covenant. What they didn't realize at the time was what they were hearing was the fulfillment of the old covenant, especially with the sacrifice of Christ on the cross as both high priest and sacrifice. So there was a lot going on, and you almost had to feel sorry for the people gathered. They were gathered, sure, to see something really special. They were gathered to hear something very special, but it was probably a sensory overload. They were probably going, whoa, it's too much. But Christ always managed to sort it out for them. So light, when we look at this, in the New Testament, the presence of salt and light. Salt is not only a preservative, a purifier, fertilizer, medicine, but what Christ is saying is, you are useful and effective in furthering my kingdom in the world, as salt is in your everyday lives. Light illuminates, defines, bears witness, warns, guides, signals. Yeah, all of that. Absolutely. Jesus seems to be saying to us, give understanding, vision, purpose, and illumination to the world around you. So it's not just that we are this passively, it is what we do as a result of that that impacts others in a very, very positive way. You know, the absence of salt in light is probably worth us thinking about. So the lack of light is simple to understand. It results in darkness. When a family in ancient times was leaving the house, they would move the oil lamp from its high location and cover it with a bowl. I've talked to you about that. Keep it safe until their return. Yeah, very important. Have you ever thought about what darkness is? You know, I guess as a beady-eyed scientist, light has always been fascinating to me. The physics of it is just stunning. It's particulate. Oh no, it's a wave. It's both. But what is darkness? It is the complete absence of light. That is amazing. So this evening, if you were to walk through that door in the dark, and you open the door, would the dark flow in or would the light go out? The dark doesn't flow in. It's nothing. It is the absence of light. So when you open that door, the light floods out. It's so unique as far as a physical phenomenon light is, that it's stunning to me that Christ used it. It's sort of like, this is really impressive. So much to learn from his healing words here. So the lack of salt is a lot more complex than the lack of light. Let's look at that. This metaphor may refer to the ancient practice of using a thick bit of salt as an additional layer of insulation on outdoor ovens. It deteriorated the salt and had to be thrown out. So that's how we can see that maybe it needs to be thrown out. Jesus also may have been referring to the mineral deposits that I just discussed with you that include adulterants, sometimes naturally occurring, sometimes sharp dealing vendors who would dilute and adulterate the salt with other lesser minerals. Salt sometimes adulterated, for example, by gypsum. However, it could also be that Jesus, who often did this, was using a little tongue-in-cheek humor. And that is, isn't it ridiculous to even think about such things as unsalty salt? Perhaps that as well. So, how could his followers fail to be useful and valuable to the world around them? Powerful words. Well, what are the spiritual lessons here for us today? The impact of both salt and light is subtle, yet powerful. A small amount of either does wonders. Likewise, Jesus' followers will not necessarily impact the world based upon great numbers or massive power, but in small but influential ways. It's those small, careful additives that build momentum. All disciples have an important mission. No one in the kingdom is without a job. Isn't that true? If you think you're without a job, just stick around just a little longer. You'll find that no, there's a whole list here for you to begin. No one need worry about that. Christians must be people who do not live just for themselves alone. And we as Christians diffuse joy to others, just like light. We begin to actually see our purpose, our vocation. We are able to overcome pessimism, negativity, a lack of self-worth, by being the salt and light to others. Again, it's a flow, it's an outflowing. It's not just this is who we are. It's it is what we do. It's exactly what Christ designed us to do. So, I will simply close this with a simple admonition for you. It's sort of like, have any of you ever thought, okay, I really blew it. I really have gone and done it now. I've run any chance I have of becoming the person, the servant that God had intended for me to become. Have you ever been there? You ever just kind of like, oh man, did I blow it or what? Well, let not your hearts be troubled. You simply are not that powerful. God has plans for you no matter what. It is for you to understand that, to step up and accept the role that He has planned for you. You're just not that powerful. Today is yet another opportunity for you to do that. Thank you.